Tell me when I can start. Okay, can I start? Yep, okay. I usually get a thumbs up, but I didn't get one. Okay, folks, welcome. Sorry we're a few minutes late, but we are dealing with the West Balkans, dare I say. We actually have only 1 hour and something like 10 minutes to resolve all the problems, but I suggest if we talk really fast, we can do it. No. Let me begin, because I said I would moderate if I can make a few comments at the beginning. So let me begin by saying the best way to tackle the enduring political challenges, as they're phrased, is to be more determined and more durable than the challenges. What exactly can be done, how quickly, and who can do it? So let me suggest a three-pronged strategy. I mean, it seems obvious, but sometimes going back to the obvious is important. 1, thwarting foreign destabilization. 2, building functional and internationally recognized states. And 3, integrating each of them into a revived EU and NATO. Easier said than done, of course, but I think it's an achievable mission over the next maybe 10 years. I'm an optimist. I want to see it before I die. But anyway, foreign destabilization, what does that mean? This primarily means combating Moscow's strategy to destabilize and dominate the region. By the way, I try as much as possible, and I think we all should, to not use the term Russians. I hear this all the time, and it simply feeds into Putin's rhetoric that we are Russophobes. We should be clear who we're talking about here. Kremlin agents, proxies, and their Western dupes. These are the people that are out to dismantle the West. It's not Russians. Right, now each government in a region must work closely, obviously, with the US and the EU to devise, and with each other, to devise an effective regional strategy that would encompass, among other things, intelligence gathering and sharing, cybersecurity cooperation, counter-disinformation campaigns, anti-corruption drives, cleaning up banking systems, exposing Kremlin-connected parties, businesses, media outlets, and NGOs. Western governments also need to launch non-military offenses against Moscow, but that's a subject for another conference. I'm not going to go into that here. 2, building functional states. This concerns everyone. I think in this effort, Washington and the EU both have a role to play by providing some of the bricks and the mortar, but it is the indigenous societies that must do the actual building, particularly in the rule of law, separation of powers, and transparent government. I think those are the 3 key principles of a functional state. Bosnia, what to do about Bosnia? I'm sure I've just come today. I didn't hear what you said, what you've been saying about Bosnia-Herzegovina for the past day and a half. But we cannot allow this country simply to drift into dangerous waters. From what I gather, from what I understand, another war is possible if the ethnic question and the ethnic secession question is back on the agenda. Bosnia, I believe, needs a constitution and an arrangement in which the principle of merit overrides that of nationality, and not by creating more administrative structures, but actually by streamlining the state. And paradoxically, I throw this out, Bosnia may actually benefit from a populist anti-establishment movement that can appeal to all citizens to drain the swamps in both Sarajevo and Banja Luka. 3, integrating each state into NATO and the EU. I think a much clearer institutional destination needs to be given to each state. The EU may not be an ideal structure, at least not for those that have been in it for a while, but for aspirant countries, it certainly provides economic and social benefits. And let's face it, the alternative for the region is not Switzerland, Norway, or even the UK, although we don't know how that's going to turn out, but growing isolation, insecurity, vulnerability, and economic retardation. Very important that we move beyond the destabilizing name dispute between Greece and Macedonia in order to bring Macedonia into NATO and the EU. Finally, this job simply has to be done. The current paralysis assists ethno-nationalists and makes Macedonia more susceptible to Kremlin intrigues. Washington here, I believe, needs to take the lead. It is time also for Athens to demonstrate that it is a responsible player that can help politically bail out the Balkans, just as the EU bailed out the collapsing Greek economy. In the case of Kosovo, Washington can play a key role in convincing the 5 EU states, or at least 3 of them, to finally recognize the country's independence. Romania and Slovakia in particular do not benefit from maintaining the Serbia-Kosovo divide, but simply contribute to enabling Russia's subterfuge. This will also assist Belgrade in its progress towards the EU, which is essential. And we must also, I think, prepare for the eventuality that Moscow may do something similar or try something similar in Belgrade that they did in Podgorica during the last elections, not to be excluded. With that said, I talked as fast as I could. Let me introduce our 4 terrific panelists in the jargon of our, let's say, administration. Our 4 terrific panelists who will have about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to pose each of them a question and try and further the dialogue. And in order of appearance, I think we'll start with you, Nikola. Nikola Dimitrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Macedonia. Welcome, Nikola.
Thank you, Janusz.
Enver Hoxhaj, Deputy Prime Minister Kosovo. Welcome, Enver. Astrit Istrefi, Executive Director, Balkan Forum. Welcome, Astrit. And last but not least, our good friend Hoyt, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, US Department of State. So, Nikola, start with you.
Thank you, Janusz, for the introduction. 3 easy issues, I think, at hand. I'm here. I'll try to be very brief because I only have 5 minutes, and this is a complicated dispute. I think that today Macedonia is a country of opportunity. Macedonia was mostly on the right side of things in the Balkans. It has been locked in a waiting room, both in terms of NATO, in terms of EU, for a number of years. As far as NATO is concerned, at least since 2008, the Bucharest summit, and on the EU side since 2005, when we became a candidate country. We signed the Association and Stabilization first, I think shortly before Croatia did. Macedonia was part of the Vilnius group. We are the only country that is still out. We made a pledge then in Vilnius. I was a very young deputy minister when I signed the Vilnius statement that said, until each and every one of us, our young democracies, become part of NATO and the European Union, Europe will not be whole and free. So we have an unfinished business. In that waiting room, we lost our compass, and we essentially undermined the functionality of our institutions. So we had a crisis of 2.5 years, but this was, to me as a citizen, a blessing in disguise, because we learned some important lessons then. Mostly for us, a lesson that we really need strong institutions, that what really matters is building Macedonia as a European democracy governed by the rule of law. Well, media will be informed because the concept of an informed citizen is extremely important, where we need judges who judge independently, where we need checks and balances. So our crisis-born government is essentially, this is the preeminent promise to our citizens. We need to make our institutions at least as resilient as our society, our citizens proved to be, because we achieved political change by mobilizing across ethnic lines and to some extent across political lines. So this makes our country a candidate that really takes reforms seriously. We are not interested in faking reforms, and we are more interested in becoming a European democracy than joining the EU. But of course those two processes are quite compatible, and the accession talks is another way of saying it's a tool to train and to coach. And the grand strategy for the region, once peace was won, mostly thanks to the American intervention in the region, was Europe in the lead. We have the accession process, and we built our societies to be more like the rest of the European societies. That's how we achieve stability. So there is another lesson, and that is partly for us, partly for our neighbors, and partly for the international community. And it is not a sustainable strategy to keep a country locked in the waiting room. for too long. And
The toothache gets worse.
learning this lesson is why I went directly to Athens in my second week as a foreign minister, essentially to say, we have a problem. I think the job of diplomacy is to resolve problems and open doors. We have an important moment, and I would like to ask you to consider what kind of a neighbor you would like to have. Then we went to Bulgaria, and in a matter of several months, we signed a treaty of friendship, overcoming some delicate issues, touching upon identity, touching upon history. I think Churchill was right when he said, we create more history in our region than we can consume. It's 2017, and I think it's time for the Balkans to step it up. We live in uncertain times globally. Europe is very busy. For us to make it as a region, we need to use the attention that we are getting. This conference is one proof, the meetings at the State Department another. Europe is energized around the Balkans. I think we have a window of opportunity that we must use and do everything that we can to use. We will not be afraid to negotiate. We will do it in good faith. The key for a sustainable solution of the name problem, the name difference, will be to address the fears on both sides. We have to change the equation that at the end of that process there will be a winner and that there will be a loser. Because I don't think that Greece can win if Macedonia feels that it has lost, and I don't think that Macedonia can win if in Greece they feel that they have lost. At the end of this process, ideally, we will have two countries that are close allies. And when I was asked by a Greek journalist on that first visit in Athens, who in Europe is your biggest ally? I said, I think it's going to be very natural that in this process of talking and overcoming issues, Greece is actually becomes our best European ally because we are neighbors. Mm-hmm. So these talks will start in a matter of days in Brussels. This is, of course, a bilateral issue, but it has significant international consequences. It has consequences on European policy in the region. It hurts its credibility. And I think it is because one of the questions in the brief was to what extent the international community should be engaged. I think if we have this perspective that it's not about winning and losing, friendly encouragement can help. And if we manage to do this, we will have more stability, we will have more opportunities for Macedonia, for our neighbors, for Europe, and it's going to be good for NATO and the United States. Now, having said that, I think I have to also add that the name issue as such should not be an obstacle to our integrations. In the rare agreements that we have with our Greek friends, we have an interim accord that was brokered by Richard Holbrooke in the context of trying to resolve issue, driving the process towards the Dayton Agreement.
94, I think it was.
This was signed in 95.
95.
And we have a judgment of the International Court of Justice that says that this issue should not be an obstacle to our integration. So this is important, but I'm not using this to say that we're going to start a new blame game to see who is guilty and who is not, because joining means that once we cross that line, we need to be allies. And we cannot really become allies by hurting each other. We have to become allies by talking. So I think that is what we have recognized. I think we have a society that is more mature now. I think that shallow nationalism can make you a hero of the day, but it usually defeats national interest. And I think it's time for visionary patriotism in our region. It's time that we don't compete who had more glorious historic defeats, but to compete in who has better healthcare, better education, a more healthy democracy, and economic growth. And my last point on mostly the responsibilities and the opportunities of the international community. The problem, the trouble with problems is that they spread if they are not attended. And it is not enough to stop a negative dynamic. We have managed to do that in Macedonia. It takes one more step further. I think it's important to promote a positive dynamic and create a success. And the more we recognize the opportunities of success in our world, the better the world will be. And I think we have an opportunity in the next, definitely in 2018, to create success in my own country and in the region as a whole.
Thanks very much, Nikola. I remember first going to Macedonia during the first elections in 1990, and you're right, people were looking towards Greece as an entry point into the European Union before this whole dispute mushroomed over the name and so forth. Maybe we can go back to this. The question I have for you, though, quickly, is what should America be doing? Should America be injecting itself more in this dialogue between Athens and Skopje?
That's a delicate question.
That's why I asked you. Pretend I'm not here. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
I think there is one clear interest at stake that probably concerns Washington, and this is the stability in the region. I think we have currently 29 NATO member states. This is not a very round number.
Should be 40, right?
And, and I heard that there are 2 vacant chairs in the old headquarters in Brussels. And I have asked many ministers of the NATO member states to keep one reserved for Macedonia. I think we have an opportunity. I think the more the Balkans is democratic, the more democracies are functional and vibrant, the less opportunity there will be for geopolitical games. And it's important, once we have this, to actually use the opportunity. So I think friendly encouragement, using the perspective that I outlined, that this should be not a zero-sum equation, but we all have something to get out of this issue, will probably be very helpful.
Okay, thanks, Nikola. Enver, view from Kosovo. You have 5 minutes to say whatever you want.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. First, thank you very much, Damon, Atlantic Council, for inviting me to this great event in Washington, D.C. I spent the last 6 months dealing with 2 election cycles in Kosovo, local and parliamentary elections, and not dealing very much with foreign policy items. But what you mentioned as the biggest challenges which the region has, and I was hearing carefully what my Macedonian friend Nikola said about the name issue. I think beyond the name issue, the region has another historic challenge, which is the relationship between Kosovo and Serbia, and also the internal situation in Bosnia. I fully agree with the list of the items which you mentioned, which we should address there, with a list of other challenges, starting from the question how much the region and how much countries and societies have been made democratic in the last 20 years, and the questions in relation to the rule of law and other issues. But in my view, name issue, the relation between Kosovo and Serbia, internal situation in Macedonia, if I would use a very linear sentence, have put the whole region in a kind of limbo, in a kind of status quo. And we could have also a similar conference, maybe in 2 years, 3 years, talking about the same issues. And as at the end of the 2017, we have everywhere new governments, in Macedonia, in Serbia, in Kosovo, I think in Bosnia next year we might have elections there. And in Montenegro, the question is what we should do in 2018, what we should do in 2019, in order not to have our situation again to reflect about these three historic challenges. 5 years ago, when we started the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, we had three main goals. The first goal was how we should normalize the relation with Serbia, as Serbia was not only not recognizing Kosovo, but at the same time trying to undermine our statehood and was trying to isolate us internationally. And I think there is some improvement in our relation between the two countries. But when you are a foreign policy politician, my job is to be pessimistic and to have pessimistic view on everything, including on the relation between Kosovo and Serbia. The second goal was how to normalize the situation in the north of Kosovo and how to dismantle Serb state parallel structures in the north of Kosovo. And I think the situation in the north of Kosovo has been very good improved. And a third goal, which we had in Pristina, but I think also Belgrade had the same goal, was how to use the dialogue in order to improve our relationship with the European Union. And I think Serbia, based on its reforms, internal reforms, and we, based on our internal reforms in Kosovo, we were able to advance our position, our relation with the European Union. And we are very proud that we were able to achieve many agreements. Some of them have been implemented, some of them have been not implemented. We are very proud that we were able in the last 10 years to build a state from scratch, to build political institutions from scratch, to keep macroeconomic and fiscal stability, which is very important for us. But I think as long as we have an outstanding, open, bilateral issue as the non-recognition issue between Kosovo and Serbia, as long as Macedonia is facing the name issue, we might have the situation of living in a kind of limbo, in a kind of status quo, even in the next years to come. And what we should do, we need to have first strategic clarity. We are ready as a government in a timetable from 2 to 3 years, actually to reach a framework agreement with Serbia, which for us would be nothing else just a peace treaty, and which should lead to a situation that Kosovo could get admission in UN. This is actually the most important strategic goal which Kosovo has, but also which could lead to a situation that we could sign diplomatic relations, and I'm aware that this cannot happen soon, but mutual recognition, diplomatic relations could happen in the next phase, but without enabling Kosovo to get admission in UN, I don't think that we have any reason to be part of a final stage of the dialogue. That we are very much interested to lead this dialogue in a final stage. But the question is, do we have the best domestic and international context for that? What I saw in the last 7 years, being more engaged on foreign policy issues, foreign policy has always two levels. It has a domestic context, and it has also an international context. And I have to say today here in DC that maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago, people were more in favor of a dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. They had a greater confidence that the dialogue might improve the situation between the two countries. Today, the political landscape in Kosovo is very much divided about the possible expectations of the dialogue. At the same time, President Vučić started an internal dialogue in Serbia, and I'm reading on a daily basis what people are saying, what people are thinking. And sometimes when I'm reading the Serb press, Serb media, I'm asking the question if these people who are spreading such kind of the narratives, who are having such kind of understanding of what Kosovo is, are living in the year 2017, or are they living in the year 1997, before the war in Kosovo started, or in the year 1987, when I was a student at the Pristina University, and before the Yugoslav conflict started. And the question is this dialogue a kind of farce, or is this dialogue going to change the public opinion in Serbia? And both contexts are very, very, very important, both domestic contexts. And then we have also our international context, which is worrying us, because I think our Western partners and allies have been closer on some issues with Russia, which is opposing Kosovo, in a more better international context in 1999 and in 2008 than in 2017. But my key message is that we need to bring the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia to a final stage, and we need to address also other historic challenges which we are facing in the region. The question is how much international community can deliver, and how much domestic context can support us to reach this new stage.
Thanks, Enver. I have a very short question on another regional issue for you, which is the border demarcation question with Montenegro. As you know, it's holding your country back from visa liberalization with the European Union. But it's also a potential dispute with a NATO member, which is the last thing Kosovo wants. This minority government, this let's say, narrow majority government in Pristina that's recently been formed, do you think it has a better chance of coming to some agreement or a lesser chance?
I have to say that this is more internal political item within Kosovo than an interstate issue with Montenegro. We have a great relation with our friends in Podgorica, and I think this item is nothing going to change. But as everywhere in the region and also in Kosovo, very often foreign policy items can be used for internal purposes, internal goals, and the best way is then how to frame and reframe them. I think we will ratify the border demarcation in our parliament. I don't think that we will do anything else, and we are aware that, to be very frank, it is more an invented issue than a real issue. But we need to create a consensus within the coalition government and within the parliament. And I hope in January we might create a momentum for that.
Good, very important. Thank you, Enver. Astrit, go straight over to you. 5 minutes, say whatever you want.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I would like to thank first the Atlantic Council for the event and the attention that our region is getting. If I'm allowed, I will start with a joke. I think it's an interesting one. So when the God was giving the best resources to the region, then he was questioned, why? And then he said, wait until I put people in. So I think there is a lot to think about the region, but what region needs for now, and this is a great opportunity. I think this is in the strategic interest of the region, is to build a new narrative, is to bring positive examples and successes at the fore. 2 days ago, before coming here, I was just randomly looking at 5 national media, the most viewed media in Serbia, Kosovo, and Macedonia. And we should not guess what was there. The headlines, out of numerous, about 7 of them were those that divide people, not unite people, were those that open the wounds of the past, of the horror, of the genocide, of the ethnic cleansing that happened in the region. Now, I know that most of you here know about 2 realities, parallel realities in the region. And one is that one of the rhetoric about nationalism, about division that is fueled by entrenched interests. And the other reality is that there is a lot going on. There is a lot of positive examples that are connecting the region, that there are inspiring young leaders from business community, from civil society, media, all walks of life that believe, genuinely believe, in a unified market, in a different vision for the region. They want a unified labor market. They want an energy market, a tourist market, a high education market. So I think until the Euro-Atlantic integration gains more momentum, what region needs is really to develop and pursue a regional agenda. And that agenda should be comprehensive, and that agenda should be the one that builds the trust between the people and their governments, and the agenda that builds the trust between the governments and the supporters, EU, US, and other partners. But that should be owned and led by the people, by the governments of the region. I think that should be guided, such an agenda should be guided by the principles of partnership and collaboration, something that is already taking place. Unfortunately, that is never hitting the headlines. That is never subject, that is never a topic of conversation, but does exist. It cannot be based on other principles. It cannot be based on rivalries. It cannot be on competition for domination in the region, on subordination. I think Macedonia's case is really something that region should take as an example. The crisis that led to the elections and the outcome of the elections is something that we should learn from. That situation made people to cross the lines, ethnic, political, and so on. And that is because there was collaboration, there was trust, minimal, and there was partnership. That's why it was successful. We don't know how that goes on, but at least as an example in the crisis that Macedonia was going, that talks about, that is something that we should learn from.
Just a minute more, Astrit, so we can open up
So,
for questions.
yes, we at the Balkan Forum are doing exactly this, and our mission is to promote a positive vision for the region, to basically work towards building a new narrative, We have had over the last 6 months over 100 interviews with senior government officials, with business and civil society leaders, with media, with academia, with university professors and students, all of them. And that is from Croatia to Greece. All of them have a message, but don't have the support. All of them are inspiring new leaders who genuinely believe in a regional agenda, in a new vision for the region that can be built by us. And they need support. They are government officials, very senior. They are people that are doing everything they can to make sure that they are going to achieve that through connections, through partnership, through cooperation. And businesses are the strongest. It is not something that we don't know, that for Kosovo, the main trade partner is Serbia. And that is only one thing that is not made public very much, or it is not being spoken of. But there are hundreds of initiatives and projects and funding instruments that are supporting cross-border cooperation, regional cooperation in the Western Balkans. I think in this, diaspora has a great role to play. Diaspora, unfortunately, was not provided with the conditions to be more involved and to support the change that region needs, that region requires.
Thank you, Astrit.
Thank you.
We need Balkan pride, or maybe West Balkan pride, rather than the negative narrative we've been hearing for so long. But anyway, I don't have a specific question for you in the interest of time, and I don't want to miss out on what Hoyt has to say. Hoyt, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Janusz. It's a great honor to be with all of you on stage and among so many experts. As the discussion has gone, I've looked further and further back, and I see even more and more experts, and so my comments are becoming shorter and shorter as I don't want to embarrass myself. But thank you, Damon, and thank you, Atlantic Council, for hosting this interesting discussion. I want to be brief, but also I don't want to miss this opportunity since I have a captive audience, or an audience locked in the waiting room, as the minister said. I think in order to address the underlying or enduring risks and challenges in the Balkans, there are a few key ingredients, and I'll list 4, and it's only some of the list. But I think we need to start with a common analysis, or try to arrive at a common analysis, because as we've heard from our eminent speakers, with whom I agree, I hear different sides of the same problem. There are different aspects to the Balkans, mostly because the Balkans are a very diverse place. No country is the same, and I think really we should acknowledge that while there are real problems, and I think Janusz honed in, for example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's some real fundamental issues we need to come to grips with. But there have been some successes in recent years in the Western Balkans. I think, well, I just want to list a few. I mean, I served in Croatia. I saw Croatia join NATO and then join the European Union. We've had most recently Montenegro join NATO after a very short amount of time with very intense reforms and sacrifices. Macedonia. Now, I'm not saying only because the minister is here next to me, but I think we shouldn't forget that 2 years ago, for 2 years, the last 2 years, there's been a crisis in Macedonia. It was one of the crises that gets a lot of our secretaries and ministers in capitals around Europe and the United States very excited and concerned and saying things like, this is a wake-up call, this is a wake-up call, we must do something. Well, there was a wake-up call in Macedonia, and I think there was actually some significant progress. Some progress that we can learn from, I think, in which we saw that there was a very close partnership between international community, EU and United States, but more importantly, there was a willingness on the part of political parties, especially in the opposition, to stand up, to speak out, to participate rather than boycott, and to participate in elections after 2 attempted elections, which were unfortunately canceled because conditions weren't right. But in December, Macedonia held its elections. It produced a government, which I think it's not an exaggeration to say, it's a pro-reform, pro-Western, pro-European government, which is headed in the right direction. So I want to begin with this sort of optimistic framing that the Balkans aren't all darkness and problems, although there are some problems we need to deal with. So how to deal with those problems? I'd say, first, the common analysis that we need, which I think we don't have now. I think there are fundamental differences, for example, in how serious are the problems in the Western Balkans, in those countries where there are problems. Bosnia-Herzegovina. Still in Macedonia, there's some fundamental challenges. In Kosovo, in Serbia, there are very different views on how serious the problems are, or even if there are problems. So I think Europeans, Americans, others who are helping need to try to come to some common analysis about what's really going on. Our view in the United States is that there are serious challenges that need to be addressed on an urgent basis. These are not problems that will get better over time, as the minister said. They need to be addressed in a serious manner, and I would say they also need to be addressed in a way that is not simply managing the problem or addressing the symptoms of the problems. We need to cure the diseases, and these are things you all know better than I do: corruption, patronage, poor governance, weak institutions. All these things need to be addressed on an urgent basis. Why? Because if we don't, there will continue to be instability. And this is also part of the analysis. Not everyone agrees. Some of my colleagues I speak to say, well, you Americans are always, saying the sky is falling. You shouldn't be so worried. All these countries have a EU perspective. All these countries are working towards EU integration. And that's true. Most of them are trying very hard, making the reform steps that they need to, but not fast enough, I would argue. Not fast enough in order to prevent this creeping instability, something I think you coined back in the 90s, Janusz's insipid destabilization, which is it's not a war, it's not a conflict, it's just the kind of growing, creeping, unraveling of structures and the strengthening of organized crime and of corruption, to the point we wake up and we have problems that no longer can be solved by mere diplomacy, unfortunately. So we need to work on that. I think we're close in many areas. I think in Macedonia, where we work very closely together, EU and US. I think in Albania, where there's been some fundamental progress in judicial reform. Again, the EU and US work very closely together. I think we found a way to address some of the core problems. But we need to have that analysis, at least in a way that we can work together with the countries, the governments in the region, but also international community. Secondly, as I mentioned, the core problems and the disease, not just the symptoms. This is difficult because we're much more, all of us, I think, as diplomats, as developers, think tankers, we're used to the usual processes that have worked over the last 20 years. If you look at what Central Europe went through in the 90s, how they adopted market economies, they adopted taxation, public governance structures that allowed them to rapidly accelerate their accession to the EU and to NATO. These frameworks, these structures don't work everywhere. There's not one size fits all, and I think that applies to the Balkans. Just because it worked in Croatia or Slovenia, I'm not saying Slovenia is part of the Western Balkans, by the way, I know the ambassador is here, but
Don't quote him on that.
What worked in Croatia or Albania, Montenegro, Slovenia doesn't necessarily work everywhere else. We need to be able to tailor the solutions, but we need to get below the surface, deep below the surface, and fix the problems that are causing the major either instability or dysfunction. And sometimes that involves doing things we don't want to do, like opening up a constitution, like the Dayton Accords Annex 4. No one is really enthusiastic about trying to do something better that Richard Holbrooke couldn't do, or that will involve very difficult compromises. But if we don't do it now, the situation will only get worse, I say. So let's address those core problems. Thirdly, I think we need to work on our partnerships. I mean, what this is all about, really, international community, working with the governments in the region, is working together in a way to get results that both sides want. And the partnerships, I would say, have gotten somewhat imbalanced in many instances. We have success stories, as I mentioned earlier. We also have some places where we're not working as closely together as we need to. I don't want to dwell on those, but I just want to point out that for the governments in the Western Balkans, whether it's in Macedonia or Kosovo or Serbia or Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we need to find ways to accelerate reforms, to solve problems, we need to have an understanding of what that partnership means. And I would say, first and foremost for us, we want these partnerships to be a two-way street. It's not one way where the West is giving and the governments on the other side are receiving. This is not tenable. It's not something that's tenable for us in the West and the international financial institutions either, whether it's EU or US. And also doesn't work very well, I would say, on the ground in the Western Balkans. So I think we need to rebalance in some of the partnerships with the expectations that we will, in the international community, provide the support and assistance that the countries of the Western Balkans need, whether that's financial, material, technical, moral, we'll provide that. And we'll be honest with you, and we'll tell you when you're doing well and when you're not doing so well. On the other side, we expect the leadership in the governments of the Western Balkans to meet their commitments. So if you're trying to join NATO or trying to join the European Union, there are commitments inherent or explicit in the compact you have in trying to join these organizations. Up till now, I think our approach, many of us in the international community, has been, it's up to you in the Western Balkans. It's up to our partners in the region to do their part. And as you do it, we will show the progress on the other side. So it's been kind of a strategic patience kind of approach. And I would argue that doesn't work. That we have to acknowledge that, first of all, the partnership is clearly based on shared interests, shared values, shared responsibility. In other words, it's not only, the West isn't doing this only for the benefit of the Balkans, Western Balkans. It's also in our benefit in the West to see security, stability, prosperity. So we need to accept that if we don't do our part in the West, that will affect not only Western Balkans, it affects us. So what does that mean in practical terms? I think it means, first of all, we need to be looking for those incentives, the support that we can provide that's not being provided already, to see if we can do better. Secondly, I think it means there has to be accountability on both sides. And accountability means, for us, if we say we're going to give you this next step or this assistance, we need to deliver. But on the other side, there has to be an acceptance of the responsibility that governments, civil society, media, judiciaries have to meet their commitments too. And if there isn't that delivery of commitments on the side of the Western Balkans, I would say there should be consequences. And we can talk about what that means. I think a lot of you have an idea of what that means. But unless there is both positive and negative incentives, I think we'll not make the progress that we need to see, that we all want to see. And it doesn't mean, I think, that one side is more to blame than the other for the lack of progress. I think both of us need to realize that we need a more robust partnership. And lastly, just to end on the U.S. role, because I know that's been talked about in earlier parts of the conference. And of course, most of you who are in this room understand that the U.S. is very involved in the Western Balkans. The U.S. administration has made clear, not only by its words, but through its actions, that it is committed to the region. And I think that makes some of you happy. I think it makes some of you less happy. But the fact is, we are involved in the Western Balkans. We have been for a long time. We intend to stay involved, not out of altruistic instinct, but because it's important for us the Balkans succeed. It's important for Europe, and therefore it's important for the United States, that the Western Balkans develop towards a more stable and prosperous place. That will help the United States. So we intend to be good partners with the countries in the region. We intend to be good partners with the EU. We can improve. We know we can do better. But I want to alleviate any sort of concerns that we're somehow trying to impose ourselves on any new process or any sort of negotiation. We will help where we're wanted or where we're needed. I don't think there are any instances in which we're trying to impose ourselves. But we do believe that there's a role for the United States, that we have played we made a positive contribution, and we hope we can continue doing so.
Okay, thanks very much, Hoyt. Apparently due to technical difficulties, you don't know the source, my microphone was cut off.
So someone turned it off.
Yeah. I don't know, it's gone. But anyway, I'm not going to ask you a question at this point. I had one in reserve, but you sort of answered it near the end. I'd like to go over, and this is a sign of favoritism, my old friend Ed Joseph at the back there. If you could introduce yourself, Ed.
Thank you. Janusz, thank you very much. Edward Joseph with Johns Hopkins SAIS. Wonderful to be here today, an amazing panel. Because very briefly, I have to congratulate Damon and his team on an important report and an important event. Very well done. And Hoyt, having just told us that, that very important statement that strategic patience doesn't work in the Balkans, having stated that correctly, let me give you a break, Hoyt, and turn to the esteemed foreign ministers and friends next to you, Nikola and Enver. And Mr. Istrefi, if you would like to comment, feel free, of course. We're here in Washington, and as you know, the default tendency in Washington has been at times on the Balkans is it's a European problem. Now, one of the things that gets Washington's attention, of course, is Russia and today Turkey. And so what I would really appreciate is Nikola, Enver, and of course Mr. Istrefi, if you would like as well, is to really paint this picture accurately for us. Help us understand how concerned we have to be, how concerned are you about the role that our adversary, Russia, is playing in the Balkans, and at the same time, particularly Enver, maybe you have some thoughts on this one as well, is what about our ally Turkey, a country that's behaving so anti-democratically, so abjectly, autocratically at home? Can it continue to be a partner in the democratic evolution of your countries and the region? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed. I think we'll take a few questions. That way we can save time. You can address all of them. Second hand I saw was here, please. Microphone.
Thank you. Meto Koloski with the United Macedonian Diaspora, and good to see.
Stand up, Meto.
I would, but minus a knee issue, it'll take me a little bit longer to get up. So good to see the foreign minister in town, who was an extremely effective, excellent ambassador while in Washington. Can you perhaps clarify more about the reconciliation efforts between Greece and Macedonia? Greece has been basically stating that they have red lines. Perhaps what are Macedonia's red lines? And to add on to Ed's question to Dasi, over the last decade, America has been the image has deteriorated within the Balkan countries, and Russia has been heavily getting more and more involved, and particularly in Macedonia, where there hasn't been a visit by a Secretary of State since 2001, a Defense Secretary since 2007, nor a U.S. President since '99, and no VP visit at all in its history. And so are there any efforts to send more positive messages to Macedonia, particularly as an ally and a partner in NATO?
Okay, thanks, Meto. Gentleman here, third row, fourth row.
Thank you. I am Ridin Latif, an alumna of Johns Hopkins University SAIS. If there's one thing that I took away from the report of the Atlantic Council, was that the blind pursuit of stability at the cost of democratic development will eventually backfire, if I understood that correctly. So my question is maybe mainly for Mr. He, but other panelists. Is the international community, mainly the EU and the US, ever in a position of having to turn a blind eye on corruption because the political elites who are in power in these countries, they might be corrupt, in the sense that you have to choose one or the other? And is that a fair assessment? Thanks.
Okay, we'll stop there. We'll have a few more questions in a minute. I want to turn back to the panelists. Maybe Nikola start with this Russia question.
Okay. All three of them, if I may.
Moscow questions, you guys. Yes. Yes.
I think on that, what's really important for us is to be left on our own to decide our own destiny and our future. And we have, in the very early 90s, across the party spectrum in the country, decided that our future should be Euro-Atlantic. We have our citizens behind that. It used to be in the spring 71% of our citizens are behind Macedonia joining NATO. With this government, it has increased. It's over 75 now. So, I mean, it is not a secret that the renewed tensions between Moscow and the Western world is adding another layer of complexity in the Balkans, let's put it that way. And sooner or later, I mean, we are not the ones that will be leading that effort, but I think at some point, this is also an issue that we will have to tackle. I think it's going to be good for Moscow, it's going to be good for the West. But as a matter of principle, I think this is our choice. It should not be an either-or proposition. I think anyone who cares about the stability in the region, the stability of Macedonia, should be behind this effort. And in my channels, both behind closed doors and publicly, I say that you know, this is our journey. We're going to make it. We have a strong resolve. And please don't make us in a position, don't put us in a position to necessarily have a negative relationship with you, you know. And it's not about liking or disliking countries. It's about what kind of a society we would like to create. And we firmly believe that joining this family will help us to achieve what we want for our citizens, which is a normal, functional democracy where people will compete on their capabilities, where courts will be trusted, and you know, this is why we want to do that. On red lines, I think when two countries want to resolve an issue, usually the wise thing to do is to negotiate not using public channels. The more we speak publicly about it, the more entrenched we will become. And I think it won't be wise on my part to talk about red lights. First of all, we are interested in green lights. We don't like red that much anymore. And it won't be wise few days before the first round of talks starts in Brussels. It's going to be on the 12th of December to talk about red lines. Let's think about opportunities. And maybe at some point we'll see how the process will go. But in the interest of the process, I think I will stop there. The last point, I couldn't agree more. I think this is a fake dichotomy. Some of my colleagues from my previous life, the think tank community, coined that stabilitocracies. And I don't think you can have a stable region that is not democratic. I think when institutions are weak and when the region is governed by strong men, that actually goes hand in hand with playing geopolitics, because strong men have a reason to justify their bad governance, so they are prone to creating crises, then resolve them, etc., etc. So I think this is fake, and turning a blind eye to basic fundamentals is a very wrong call in the long run, and it will backfire. And we will, and I don't think I've said this ever publicly so far, we had an internal discussion in Macedonia. The European Commission, talking about corruption and anti-corruption, the Commission had a very successful exercise back in 2014, a very in-depth methodology of measuring corruption. It was developed to be used within the EU for member states. It was Commissioner Malmström from Sweden who developed it. And we decided in Skopje that we will volunteer to make Macedonia subject to that in-depth methodology that doesn't measure perception of corruption, but actual corruption. And it includes a number of surveys with private companies, citizens, and it's sectoral. To show, first of all, that we're serious when we want to fight corruption, and second, to gain the input of the methodology.
Mm-hmm. Good. Like to see the results at some point. Enver.
On the Russian role in the region, I think we should neither overinterpret the Russian role in the region, neither underestimate because when I'm reading sometimes how even the local media or international media are talking about that, I think they are talking about the realities who sometimes doesn't exist in the region. But it is true that from Russian point of view, the region, it's a kind of new geopolitical chessboard they would like to play. They would like to have a role there. And it depends where they can have a kind of direct influence. In case of Kosovo, Russia doesn't have at all any kind of leverage over Kosovo. In case of other countries in the region, yes, I mean they have a role. And I'm not saying because of some open, outstanding issues between Kosovo and Serbia, but me worries that Serbia is a kind of source for the Russian propaganda in the region. That some Serbian media are the best platform to spread disinformation across the region about Kosovo, but also about the West. And what is actually happening is that they're trying to promote a narrative among the countries of the region that membership in NATO or accession in European Union will not happen. Or they're trying to attack different governments in different countries, including Kosovo, on daily basis by using all possible means of a hybrid war, which we are seeing there in the region. But in economic terms or in other terms, sometimes it is an overinterpretation about the Russian role. I mean, if we see how much total trade the Western Balkans is doing with the European Union, I think it's over 75 or 80%. And with Russia is around 5%, and with Turkey is around 4%. These are enough clear parameters in order to understand clearly what is happening there. I fully agree with France in the panel that the region has made a huge progress in the last 20 years. That the half of the region is part of NATO, part of the European Union. But in my view, as long as we have these three historic challenges unaddressed, those might be also a very good platform for external actors to be used and misused. And this is the reason why I think we need to have a kind of new roadmap for the Balkans in the next years to come. At least from Kosovo, we are more than interested in a timetable 2 to 3 years to sit with Belgrade and to address all issues which we could address, not buying time. The region, if it will face still a kind of lack of predictability, might be something where Russia in the future might have a bigger role than it has today.
Thank you, Enver. Astrit?
I'll share some anecdotal evidence.
Try and be brief with the anecdotes if possible.
Very brief. So I was attending a conference in Montenegro a few months ago. Participants were mainly young, bright students and graduates from the region. It was so indicative how especially young people from Montenegro and Macedonia, those coming from rural, more remote areas, are influenced by the propaganda about Russia's role and then the effects that may have in the region. And the conference was talking about Montenegro's experience gaining membership into NATO.
That's it. Thanks very much. Hoyt? Particularly the last question you may want to handle.
Yeah, I'll address the question about the U.S. image in the Western Balkans. And I have to say, fortunately, we American diplomats are not evaluated on the basis of how popular we are in the Western Balkans. We're not even trying to be popular. I have to say, I think most of the international players in the Western Balkans are there because of national interests. Just as Western Balkans act according to their interests, we are also acting according to our interests. What we're trying to achieve is progress towards European Union integration or NATO integration, greater progress towards stability and security and prosperity. Sometimes that involves doing things that are not popular. There are reforms that are certainly causing this so-called reform fatigue. There is calling attention to widespread, sometimes systemic corruption. There are things that, that media in many of the countries in the Western Balkans take exception to, partly because they're controlled by parties which take exception to what we're doing. But what we want to do is better explain our role. I think there's a legitimate point made by our colleague from the diaspora of Macedonia that there is a need for the West to explain through public diplomacy, through media, why we're doing what we're doing. And I accept we can do a better job of that. There's also, though, and Enver pointed to this too, in the framework of partnerships, there's a responsibility of governments, I would say also, to explain to the people what are the advantages of the European Union membership? What are the advantages of NATO? What are the advantages of certain reforms? The partnership between Serbia, for example, and the European Union is very, very strong. But I think the popularity of the European Union is far below this country which Janusz said we shouldn't name. But it is a fact that for foreign investment, trade, commerce between the European Union and Serbia, there's no comparison with this other country. And the 2016 figures for direct investment, foreign direct investment in Serbia, 4 billion euros, I think, from the European Union in Serbia, 80 million euros from Russia. Oops, I said it.
In that context, it's fine to say.
Okay, but the point is, why do citizens in Serbia not know this? I mean, partly I think, yes, the European Union, like the United States, should do a better job of explaining its role, public diplomacy, media, we can do a better job. But it's also important for governments to explain to their people why they should do these things. And then let's lastly, just very quickly, on the issue of turning a blind eye to corruption. Absolutely, we do not turn a blind eye. And I would say the United States is probably among the international community the most aggressive in pursuing corruption in the Western Balkans. We're the only country I know that's applying sanctions in the Western Balkans. If you look at what we're doing with the European Union, and the European Union also has, I think, been very good at helping in Albania fighting corruption by targeting reforms in the judiciary to make it much more difficult for corrupt judges and prosecutors to be active. And I think similar reforms are necessary, Kosovo and Macedonia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thanks very much, Hoyt. Damon, how much time do we have? Do we have to finish on the dot, or can we run over a little bit? Okay, let me take a couple more questions because I see a couple of hands up. Kurt came all the way from Scotland. I need to bring you in.
Thank you. Kurt Messina, Democratization Policy Council. My question is for Foreign Minister Dimitrov. Your transition, your breakthrough, your democratic breakthrough started in the street, and it started with civil society, and then you had a synthesis with the opposition, equipped with the recordings that exposed the skullduggery of the outgoing government. And what forged that synthesis was this sense that people had been had, and they never wanted that to happen again, and they needed to clear the blockage to reset democracy. So, and that's now this question is, how do you consolidate that and live up to that promise? So my question is, institutional reform to ensure that political party leaders can never be as dominant in controlling the system as Gruevski was. What kind of institutional mechanisms are you looking at in terms of functional decentralization of political power in Macedonia? Thank you.
I'm an equal opportunity moderator. Very last question, lady there on the left.
Hello. Maida Ruge, I'm with the Johns Hopkins University SAIS, and I've worked quite closely with the Atlantic Council team on the Balkan program. My question is maybe more of a kind of statement, but also question that I have asked the Deputy Prime Minister Hoxhaj when he was here a couple of months ago, and that I've mentioned to Hoyt during lunchtime. Since this is a panel on enduring political challenges, and relationships between Kosovo and Serbia are portrayed as one kind of last unsolved challenge, I have to say that the relationships between Kosovo and Serbia are miles better than relationships between Bosnia and Kosovo. In terms of people-to-people contact, Bosnians have to travel to Zagreb to get a visa, to get to Kosovo, and the Kosovars are traveling to Macedonia to get a visa to go to Bosnia. Kosovo is the 10th largest trading partner of Bosnia, and the trading relationship is absolutely damaged by the visa regime and the lack of any kind of relationship.
We have very limited time. Please,
So-
just a quick question, very quick.
What is it that can be done to start at least technical solutions, putting aside the recognition issues?
Good, thank you very much. That's it with questions for now. Very last comments. You can answer these two questions, plus a parting thought you would like to leave, maybe a bumper sticker or a slogan. I'll start with you, Nikola.
Thank you, Janusz. Briefly on this, I think it's an important question. I think it's going to be a daily battle. And it's partly about institutional mechanisms. So for one, the heart of the crisis, the abuse of the interception of communication, the system to listen to people. We're going to be taking out that from the state police. We're going to create a separate agency, and they will act upon court orders only, and they will switch on, switch off, but they won't have access to content. And they will then give content to organized police, financial police, state security, etc. And they will have multi-layered control, parliamentary oversight, civil society oversight. So this is one example. I think what's more important is the emboldened citizens, civil society, even though we are partners. I joined this government essentially coming from the activist part of the effort. We are being criticized. Media are criticizing. The civil society are criticizing. The threshold of tolerance for wrongdoing in the country is now very low. And I think in the long run, that's extremely important, in addition to having an open perspective. And my parting thought, the bumper sticker. We have had a very sunny day, so I want to end on an optimistic note. I think we have an opportunity. I think we all share a common European future, and some of us share a common Euro-Atlantic future. I think we can make it. And I'm very encouraged with the attention of this city. I think with an honest friend like the United States and interested member states, those who can make decisions, our neighbors, we can actually make this happen.
Great, thanks very much. Enver, very quickly.
We have a pretty good exchange between Kosovo and Bosnia in terms of societal exchange. And the Bosniaks who are living in Kosovo, and we are very proud that they are integrated at local and central level. The reason why Bosnia put a visa regime for Kosovo citizens, and the reason why Bosnia does not recognize Kosovo, has to do with the fact that Bosnia doesn't have a tool of independent foreign policy. I'm sorry. Bosnia regionally, when it comes to Kosovo, and when it comes to some other regional issues, is simply an extension of Serbia. And this worries me, and I could deliver a speech on that around 2 hours by providing you with some concrete examples. How we might be able to address that, I don't know. But on our side, there is a strong will really to abolish the visa regime. On the region as a whole, I think we need to complete state building, we need to complete sovereignty, we need to solve identity issues, and we need to create, at least in the next 2 to 3 years, a new momentum. The region needs to have a good year, as Hoyt was mentioning, as we had in 2013 when Croatia got membership. And that should happen at least in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, so we can do it, a new momentum. Astrit?
Well, I'll say what I started with. Optimism is necessary, but there are people, including our leaders, who are bringing energy, are bringing spirit, and are bringing inspiration to the region and working to change the narrative. And I think that should not be overlooked. I think people at the grassroots level, at the business community, civil society, and media should be strongly supported.
Thank you. Hoyt, last word.
Double bumper sticker. Well, first is that political will matters, and what a lot of the countries in the region, I think, need to do, the leaders need to show more political will. It's within the grasp of the Republic of Macedonia and Greece to solve the name issue. It's within already the grasp of Kosovo to ratify the border demarcation agreement. It's within the grasp of the people in the governments in Kosovo and Serbia to reach an agreement on an end state for normalization. Political will can make a difference. Second bumper sticker is people matter. People need to participate. And Kurt got to this point, I think, when he mentioned about what happened in Macedonia was a political process, but it also involved a lot of citizens finally standing up and saying enough is enough, and voting in the ballot by their presence in the streets as well for progress. I think, I'm not advocating riots or massive demonstrations, but I think it's important for parties and citizens to participate at a higher level than they are right now, so that they can inform their politicians, their elected leaders. They expect results, not just a lot of words. So citizens need to participate, need to vote, participate in elections.
On those notes, there's a huge bumper, but anyway. We get the point. Thank you very much, Hoyt. Thank you for the panelists. And I'd like to thank the Atlantic Council and Damon in particular for helping to get our region back on the agenda, back in focus here in Washington. I think it's very important, because that way we'll know what we still have to do together. And we can do it. We can do it. Thank you.